That must be your wife.
Hi, Sarah. That was my grandmother's name, but she had an H on it. I gotta get my
Thank you all for being here today. I'd like to introduce to you the Towpath Volunteers performing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And I would like to welcome everyone to the Wayneport Union Burying Ground. The land for this little cemetery was given by deed, dated May 16, 1833, to a board of trustees who paid $12.50 to the former owners, Caleb and Catherine Lehman. The deed stated that this half acre of land was free for all, who saw fit to bury therein, and was to be used for no other purpose. It was signed and sealed in the presence of a Samuel Havens and a James B. Foote, but the deed itself was never recorded. At that time, Wayneport was known as Barringer's Basin, and was later given the name of Wayneport because it was the first port in Wayne County on the Erie Canal. There are 91 burial plots here, many occupied but without markers. Also buried here are 3 Civil War veterans and 1 Navy boy. Throughout the years, the cemetery records were handed down to the survivors of the Roderick McLeod family of Wayneport, and in the early 1960s ended up in the hands of Macedon resident and local farmer Charlie Packard, who has been caretaker of the grounds for over 30 years. The inspiration behind my search for the final resting place of these canal workers was a passage that I had read in a book called The Towpath by a Rochester journalist and author, the late Arch Merrill. He stated that in a little cemetery north of Wayneport rest the bones of 26 laborers who died of smallpox while building the Clinton Ditch. After locating the cemetery and finding it devoid of any kind of marker indicating that this was indeed the place where these men were buried, I then consulted Mr. Packard. Charlie discovered in his cemetery records a handwritten recording stating that these laborers died of an epidemic before the completion of the improved Erie Canal in 1846 and were buried here in unmarked graves. The claim that was once only folklore has now become a fact. According to Mr. Craig Williams, historian at the State Museum in Albany, this is the only cemetery in New York where canal laborers are buried, confirmed by documentation. The building of the Erie Canal was funded by the state of New York alone and was accomplished by manpower, animal power, and most of all, faith and determination. Our forebears were men filled with a tremendous sense of pride and patriotism. Only 41 years had gone by since the Declaration of Independence, giving this country its freedom. Our country was so very young and new that the magnitude of such an undertaking in building a canal clear across the state was almost inconceivable. Our forefathers were very religious men too, for they truly believed that by placing Lake Erie 565 feet above the Hudson, God had foreordained a path for the canal, and it was up to the people of New York State to complete the divine intentions. And it just so happened to be that most of the materials needed for its construction were found along the banks of the canal, providing them with every means at hand to dig a ditch 363 miles long through the wilderness, uniting the eastern part of this nation to the west. But where was the state of New York going to find enough willing men to complete such a major task? Native New Yorkers, including farmers, merchants, and professional men, along with Irish and Italian immigrants, Southern blacks, and New Englanders, thousands contributed to the construction of the Erie Canal. They worked from sunup till sundown, 7 days a week, for 50 cents a day, meals, and probably a few shots of whiskey now and then to keep up with the rapid pace. It was extremely physical, back-breaking work. There were no steam shovels, no cement mixers. Everything was done by hand with axes, wheelbarrows, picks, and shovels. As they worked along, they invented their own work devices, such as the stump puller. Before they could even begin to dig, they had to cut down thousands of trees and remove not only the stumps, but their roots too. Accidents, diseases, and death took its toll on the canal. Many workers became ill with malaria, working up to their necks in the muck and mire of the Montezuma swamps and sleeping in mosquito-infested shacks. Smallpox and cholera also swept the canal. The cholera epidemic of 1832 raced rapidly down the canal, spreading into the Mississippi and killing many. Some of the first to be stricken by diseases were the canal workers, especially lock tenders, since they had direct contact with the boats carrying contagious people. A possible scenario in regards to the laborers buried here could be that because Wayneport was, and still is, a very swampy area, it would have been a potential spot for all kinds of diseases. Working conditions could have been very cramped and unsanitary, making these men perfect targets of a deadly epidemic. As to who these men were, we just don't know. They could have been local workers who lived nearby, or it's very possible that they could have been Irish immigrants, which in the latter case might help us to understand why no records can be found as to the names of these men and where they were from. If they were immigrants, they probably died alone, their families never knowing what became of their loved ones. Epidemics were very frightening back then. People panicked. The 26 victims of this disease were more than likely quickly and quietly laid to rest here, probably because it was the closest cemetery that was free for all. Their exact location is undetermined. However, the records do show that there are some occupied plots without markers in the back right-hand corner of the cemetery where the tent is. And also in the front here are 2 rows of graves that are marked by field stones every so many feet apart that are listed in the records as just unknown. These men may be gone, but their legacy lives on. Not only did the building of this great waterway become a very important part of our American history, it too became just as important in our American literature. The lifestyles of these laborers, boatmen, towpath drivers, and lock tenders, along with their packet boats and mules, created a very colorful era in the mid-1800s. Canal diggers sang songs and ballads, which throughout the years have been changed and embroidered, becoming a very significant part of American folklore. The beautiful barge canal system of today, that for the past 100 years was toll-free for everyone's enjoyment, remains today as part of their legacy. The Erie Canal, by its very nature, was a national enterprise which related the growth of other states to New York. It served as a bond, uniting this country and preventing any detachment of the east to the west. New York became known as the Empire State, and New York City became the commercial capital of America. Many towns greatly benefited by the Erie. Macedon, Palmyra, Newark, Lyons, and Clyde all blossomed on its banks. Canandaigua wanted a port in their county, so they saw to it that Port Gibson was part of Ontario County instead of Wayne. Rochester, Buffalo, and Syracuse all became great cities. Even the towns where the canal did not directly pass through also benefited. People from towns like Farmington, Shortsville, and Victor had only to transport their goods by horse and wagon a few miles over to the canal, where the boats would be ready to deliver them to their destination. Using the canal was not only cheaper and faster, but it also offered an easier and smoother way to transport the goods to market. Without the builders of this major task, the Erie Canal may not have come into existence at such an early time in history. The engineers and contractors of the Erie opened up the engineering process of America. But it was the painstaking and tireless efforts of the laborers, the little guys, so to speak, that built the original Erie Canal in only 8 short years. Some of the beautiful old locks in this area on the Erie enlargement still stand today as monuments of their great works. 146 years ago, these forgotten men at Wayneport suffered an untimely death while performing a task that would make life a little bit easier for their families, for posterity, and for their country. We gather here today in posthumous recognition to honor these men for their grand achievements and contributions to the state of New York and to America. Thank you. Okay, now at this time I would like to introduce to you the Reverend Carol Holtz from the First Baptist Church in Macedon, who will give prayer, followed by Amazing Grace by the Towpath Volunteers.
Psalm 90 says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Let us pray.
In remembrance of the 26 Erie Canal laborers buried here, stricken in 1846. They built the longest canal with the least experience for the most public benefit. donated by people who cared. And I want to thank each and every one of you who donated. I couldn't have gotten it without your help. Thank you. And last but not least, sincere thanks to Mr. Lynn Davis, Mr. Richard Sturgis, and Cindy Jessup of Waste Management for being the kind and caring people that they are. Thank you so much for your generosity and preparation for this ceremony. And to the work crew of Waste Management, you did a wonderful job with restoring the cemetery. Thank you all very much for coming and showing your support.
Not only the husband, just in terms of